politics of tea. The agenda was about tea. Tea is what the meeting was about, simply tea. Now, some people called it hype, others claim it's a distraction. But whatever the term is, Friday's event calls into question the media handling of the issue, and many are asking what should be given priority given the resources that are available, particularly the crunch time in most newsrooms, also including at the public broadcaster. Well, let's unpack this further. We're joined now by a veteran journalist and outgoing press ombuds, Pippa Green. We have Media Monitoring Africa Director William Bird, our own Newzroom Afrika senior politics reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, and ANC veteran Mavuso Msimang. Remember, you can be part of this conversation by tagging us at Newzroom405. That's the Twitter handle. Or otherwise, you can send us your WhatsApp questions and comments right now to 072-110-5584. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for joining us. Good evening, Ziyanda.
Good evening, Tabo. Hi.
Let me start with you, Ziyanda. No agenda, as you know, yet you went on a flight and went to Durban to go and cover the story where the agenda was about tea. Was there a story to begin with that led you to go to the gathering?
Absolutely. I think there are many reasons why one would have gotten onto a flight and gone to KwaZulu-Natal. One, if you look at the relationship and the political history between the two figures, between EFF leader Julius Malema and former President Jacob Zuma, that discussion about tea left much to be desired in terms of what exactly is going to be discussed. But secondly, I don't think it was a coincidental that they discussed this tea meeting publicly so on Twitter after having been told that this is actually not the first time then that the two men, there've been efforts to sort of reconcile the two men who at some stage were strong allies and then at another became foes with one another. I think another reason as well to go down to KwaZulu-Natal is the context within which this tea party was taking place. A few days prior then to Julius Malema offering putting up his hand rather to say, Mr. Zuma, will you have tea with me? It comes days after he had said that he plans to defy a constitutional court judgment in which it makes him and forces him to appear before the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. Now, this is the context within which then that meeting was taking place. But there's also a context for Julius Malema here. And we know that in politics, there are no permanent friends and foes. There are common interests. He himself is facing the scrutinization of his bank accounts by the Zondo Commission. So yes, the Constitutional Court judgment and Zuma's abidance to that is one aspect. But of course, then this meeting could signal a significant political shift on our political landscape.
Yeah, talk about that political shift in a moment. William Bird, I'll bring you in here. For many members of the public who are listening to this, they all went because, of course, their understanding of how the media works and probably our understanding of how it works could be different. They went, well, you are not invited, so they really don't owe you a briefing. In fact, it was courtesy that they even came to tell you that they were meeting about tea. However, we do know that this was a very public invite, maybe even a private invite before it became public. And when you look at the mechanics of media and how it works, the fact that it was tweeted the way that it was tweeted and how it worked out and who would have been involved in it, it was an invite to the media, was it not?
I think there's very little doubt that it was anything but that, an attempt at narrative manipulation to get people to think and to speculate as we're doing now, to go, well, what was the meeting really about? Did they discuss this? Did they discuss that? If they really did just want to gather together and have a cup of tea, there would have been no reason to make a big song and dance around it. Arriving in a helicopter, all of these kinds of things are symptomatic of, the urgency that it's treated, that you have to fly there in that way. There's, the fact that you're meeting there and then that you come out and you say, all we did was have tea, as though, why are you making such a big thing about this when, of course, it was done with a very deliberate intent of getting people to start to say, well, what could be the possible reason for this? So then you get to the media and you say, well, should they have been covering this, and to what extent should they have been covering this? There's no doubt that both of them have been in the news, as Yanda has just spoken about. there are lots of compelling reasons and why they may be wishing to form some kind of an alliance or something. But you then say, well, what are the other pressing news issues at the moment? And would those have merited additional coverage? So, and those are the things that the media themselves have to balance on an ongoing and daily basis.
Now, in terms of the space in which we're playing in, and these two particular leaders and how they've used social media before, I mean, is it any different to how they normally use it? And was there a particular effect that they were looking for with the use of social media and how they used it?
No, look, I mean, I think that the EFF in particular are masters at using social media to push a particular narrative and to make sure that they inject themselves into that narrative. So you had, at the start of the week, it was all about, whether the former president, his position that he had taken in regards to the Constitutional Court to say, I'm not going to be going. And so there was the issue there about what the ANC is doing. Is the ANC condemning it? What are they doing? And it was all about the ANC. And suddenly with this, it shifts away from being all about the ANC and their response and the top six's response to suddenly being about, well, who are these people and why are they gathering and what does the EFF have to do with this and how could they possibly be reconciling when, they've historically had such a very animosity-filled relationship over the last couple of years. So, there's no doubt that they did this very purposefully to inject themselves into that narrative. And if you look at, what's been going on, there's a reason why they see that this is the opportunity to start to build that kind of idea that there's something bigger at play here. It feeds into those ideas, especially if they're worried about potentially being called before the Zondo Commission themselves.
All right, Baba Mavuso, let me bring you here. Was this a ground-shifting gathering of past political foes and quite significant, I suppose, in the sense, in the context of our politics?
Well, what must be given to Malema and the EFF is that they are past masters at creating publicity. Clearly for this meeting, this invitation to have been done on Twitter meant that they wanted to derive maximum publicity. And there was the media really falling into the trap. I'm not really suggesting they should or shouldn't have, but they played into the hands of what the EFF wanted. It can't have been just tea. Malema is quite an astute political player. He is a charismatic and charming fellow, really. And he knows how to play his cards. So he's got to be given that. He's astute, he's savvy in how he deals with these things. The only thing I cannot say about him in these terms is that his political philosophy has anything to do with morality or ethics. He does not like Jacob Zuma, and he has taken every available opportunity to humiliate him over the years. He has said he's being a polygamist, is antithetical to the interests of the rights of women. He said he's not a leader, good leader. He's a role model for corruption. He's taken a particular delight in likening the former president's head to a butternut. And he made huge capital out of that disastrous liaison between the former president and Kwesi. And from then on, you had Malema talking about the showerhead. He actually, he's humiliated him, he despises him thoroughly.
We have seen that irritation at times when the former president, for example, was in parliament and they would disturb his addresses. They would literally taunt him live there in front of the glaring eye of the public. And the president is well aware of all this, yet the timing of him accepting this olive branch or this tea meeting in the context of whatever else that was happening in the country, he had just released the statement that he will not be complying with the court order and he will not be continuing to give testimony at the Commission of Inquiry. Mavuso, I'll bring you back. I was asking you the question before the break around the timing of it and former President Jacob Zuma being well aware of all the issues that you've raised and their past history and the view of this young man, of the former president. Yet he accepted that olive branch, I suppose with the advice of whoever was there, and I'm assuming here the mediator in between in this tea, the mayor of Ekurhuleni, Mzwandile Masina, and we saw Tony Ngeni there as well. That in itself playing some kind of optics into this whole conversation.
So, okay, is it me to speak? No, yeah. As I've indicated, Malema despises Jacob Zuma, but what they have in common, he and Jacob Zuma, is a really strong dislike for President Ramaphosa. Malema, the popularity of President Ramaphosa in the country is one serious obstacle to Malema and the EFF's ambitions. If it hadn't been for Cyril Ramaphosa, the EFF would have performed much better during the last elections, but his credibility, Ramaphosa's, is an obstacle to the EFF's growth. So that would be one reason. But who better than getting the enemies of Zuma, of the ANC, I would say, actually, whether they want to admit that or not, to be part of this strategy to destabilize the ANC than to have Masina and Tony Ngeni, the people who take pot shots at the president at every turn. So the meeting of Malema, Tony Ngeni, of Masina, and in Nkandla with Jacob Zuma, constitutes a group of people who've got very strong reasons not to want Cyril to continue. He's being accused of liking white people, as if Mr. Malema himself does not like rich white people. But that is what brought them together, how to destabilize Cyril Ramaphosa to strengthen the EFF's positions, fortunes, because as long as the ANC is strong, the EFF will have problems. But finally, it has been said that Malema always had ambitions, desires to go back to the ANC. Now, he wasn't going to go back with a begging bowl. He would like to do that on his own terms. And the facilitators of that are the people who do not like the existing order in the ANC. And that's the people who are gathered there.
Pippa, what would have happened if the media didn't go? What would it mean if the media didn't go and cover this event? Others are saying, well, it would have been the censoring of the tea.
It would have been a real...
let me bring Pippa Green here. Pippa?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I completely agree with, Mavuso is much better versed in the politics of this than I am, but I saw the picture. It looked like, fields full of OB vans. And I know that if you're a news editor, you've got to make that call. Do you play into, I think William used the word manipulative. Do you play into the manipulative invitation on Twitter to be there and spend a lot of money going there? Or do you decide to hold off? But let me just make 2 points about that. My distress at the moment with a lot of coverage of the country is that we ignore rural areas. So in Nkandla, there's been research done recently that showed that in terms of food security risk around the lockdown, Nkandla is one of the 5 most food insecure rural areas in the country. It's also in the list of the 20 poorest wards in the country. if you had had journalists who had perhaps done some research on the area before they'd gone, and their news editors had said, look, swing by for the picture of the chopper landing, which is another point I want to just briefly touch on, but stay and do a proper story about how people in Nkandla are actually surviving the pandemic and the lockdown, because the research that I've just seen shows that it's the most susceptible to the pandemic. I think that with the demise, or the, perhaps demise is too strong a word, but with the weakening of public's broadcast station radio news, we're not seeing that kind of coverage anymore. So that's the of, with this fairly manipulative invitation, with something on what the area is about. But that takes research, and I know that journalists are hard pressed and often they don't do research. But the second question, and forgive me if I'm being ignorant, and perhaps it's been answered. I've just been driving down. Actually, I'm quite near Nkandla right now. I'm speaking to you from Mtunzini. But did anyone ask, and William might know this, who paid for the chopper? Because choppers are not that cheap. You know, which benefactor, Mavusa alluded to some of the benefactors that Julius Malema and the EFF had, but who paid for the helicopter and the incredible welcome that we're watching now on our screens that they had? Because he's not a head of state, he's not a cabinet minister. You know, those are questions that I think are worth pursuing.
Well, I mean, those are questions that have been asked by DA's Natasha Masoni. And Ziyanda, I suppose you could be looking at that particular story as well. And that is a question that is being put to Parliament at this particular point on that question.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, it's also to say you can look at one thing, but you can be looking at many things at the same time. I know that some of the criticism that's been lodged against some of us who were there is the extent to which, and William actually touched on this, the extent to which then coverage was given of this, you know, the blow-by-blow coverage of Malema arriving and continuing with crossing throughout, etc. You know, if I could just speak for the editors here at Newzroom Afrika and the kind of conversations we were having, it touches on what Pip has spoken about. Do we go? Do we not go? What is the news value of going there? And, you know, the political spectacle was there, but there wasn't political spectacle on our part. If anything, we are telling the story of the political spectacle. I think there was also criticism about, you know, there are other issues that we should rather have been directing our channel's resources towards, and in terms of focusing and giving coverage, which I think Pippa is alluding to here. And I think the response to that is, well, if I could just remind you of that secret meeting where, you know, there was an alleged plot by Ace Magashule and the likes of Supra Momapelo at a hotel in KwaZulu-Natal. The issue of the invitation, number one, I think by virtue of the jobs that we do, in many aspects we are intruders. This thing of whether or not we were invited, for me, it's inconsequential because of the nature of how it was done, and it was deliberately done publicly so. And so one would expect that as a political journalist, one of our duties would be to explain then why this is being done publicly, the context within which this particular discussion is happening, and hopefully be able to tell the story of what was discussed because of the ramifications it could have on the governing party, on the EFF, but also the political landscape in general.
Right. But Mavuso, there is a feeling that, for example, we are disturbing the peace of the former President Jacob Zuma as the media. Why can't we leave this man in peace? Every second day, we want to report about what's happening in his house, whether Uyolusa or Ukibeli Kwat bike yake is going hunting. Why can't we just leave the man alone in peace? I mean, can the media in South Africa afford to leave the former president alone and actually not report on the things that are going on in his life?
No, you do not get an invitation of this nature and ignore it. You were going to take a decision that you are going to cover this or not for the sake of Jacob Zuma getting some peace or anything. He played into the arrangement with Malema. They did want the two of them covered. Two of them, they really wanted the media coverage. In fact, if there's anything, it's a huge scoop for both of them. I think the winner, though, is Malema. I don't think anybody would be worrying about Jacob Zuma being disturbed while doing this, that, and the other. I think it would be very easy for him to ask for that, to not to be done to him. And of course, one way of avoiding publicity is not issuing statements that defy the Constitutional Court, and also not having such nice friends as the Secretary General who says Constitutional Court is not sacrosanct. I know the short answer is I don't think former president is being unduly harassed. I think if he didn't want that kind of publicity, he wouldn't be doing the things that he's doing.
William, I bring you in here to that question that people was asking. I mean, I know the immediate reaction to that would be, why are we policing Malema's wealth, or even maybe whoever is funding him? If it was, I don't know, any other political leader of any other party other than EFF, we would not be asking a question such as who paid for the helicopter. Is the media being biased in that line of questioning and pursuing that thinking around this tea?
Well, no, I think that certainly if you saw John Steenhuisen arriving in a helicopter and being whisked off, you'd also be saying, well, what are you doing arriving in a helicopter? I think that is a perfectly legitimate question to ask. You know, again, this is about the politics of spectacle, right? It's the precise, and they know this. It's why they're saying, no, it was just about tea, because they want us to think, well, what was it really about, right? Why did you didn't have to arrive in a helicopter. You could have flown in, you could have landed somewhere else and arrived discreetly in a car. No one even needed to have known that he arrived. But of course, they want to know, they wanted everyone to know, here he is, this is the man of great importance. He arrives in a helicopter and you see him walking from the thing, and it allows everyone an opportunity. Well, off he goes. What do you think he's thinking about? How do you think they're going to handle the tea that they're going to have after such animosity, blah, 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 right? That's what this was deliberately engineered to do. And I think, you know, to that extent, Pippa's completely correct. The issue here is not so much what went on in there, because if there had been something of substance, they would have announced it, you know, and maybe in due course something may eventuate. But the key issue is to look at the issues around poverty in Kandla, to look at the issues around food security and say, well, isn't it ironic that you've got the former president whose homestead is there, and yet this is one of the most food insecure areas? And did they discuss that over their tea, or did they not? You know, those might be some difficult questions that we need to put to them, instead of then just necessarily allowing them to dictate the narrative as they did and as they're doing, by just saying, no, we just met and had tea. So in the middle of a COVID pandemic, you just had tea. That didn't come up. The issue of vaccines didn't come up. The issues of how we're dealing with our education system, of how we're going to deal with the very real questions that are there, those things didn't come up. Did you ask the former president about gender-based violence and steps around that? You know, like things like that. And instead, we let them determine it, almost because they kind of said to the media, no, we're only going to let in very few, selected people that we trust. They'll be given an inside track, but the rest of you, we don't trust you, we don't like you. And yet, ironically, of course, they wanted them there, just precisely why they did that.
All right, William, thank you very much. Ziyanda, the other question that I wanted to put to you was the handling of the briefing by the spokesperson and how he handled the media, in a sense, feeling like, look, I don't owe you anything. You guys came here as courtesy. In fact, I don't have to answer your questions. This meeting was about tea, and I am the spokesperson of the party. No one will speak after me. This is it. Go home.
I think if you look at the posture of Vuyani Pambo, I assessed it as whatever was being discussed in that meeting didn't go according to plan, and hence he was probably not a part of the intricacies of the discussion, and yet he was sent out to speak to the media. The fact that he was even saying we weren't invited was completely false, and shows then that he was probably put in a difficult position, and by that he probably then resorted to his own way of responding to the media. No ways was he doing us any favor by coming to speak to us, because of the fact that even as a political journalist, I'd spoken to some of the people who were in that that meeting. They wanted us there. Exactly what William and Tate Mavuso are speaking about. They wanted us there, but I don't think that the outcome that they hadn't expected or were hoping for, it didn't turn out that way, and hence then we had this antagonistic response then from the EFF spokesperson, who basically told us, well, all we had was tea, and that was all we came here to discuss. It was nice, it was sweet, the tea was great. And really, I think it also just tells us then in the manner in which they view us and the resources then that have been spent to go to Nkandla. But that in and of itself, I don't think was quite the waste, because then everybody got to see then, some of the conditions that as journalists we work under, the manner in which we get treated when things don't go according to plan by some of the newsmakers.
Yeah. Apparently, the Zuma operation treated you very well there. You were also served meat.
Yes, I mean, to show that we were actually invited, the meat that was shown on social media, we were also served some of that meat, and we're actually treated very well by the Zuma family, and in a very hospitable manner. Hence, I'm saying, I think, from the newsmakers, some of the people who were on the chopper who had spoken to, who had said there was going to be an important announcement that would be made after the meeting, and hence then the decision to actually go down to KwaZulu-Natal, and then having Vuyani coming out and telling us it was tea, the tea was great. For me, I took that as an indication that whatever was discussed didn't go according to plan, and that this important announcement that we had been waiting for, anticipating the entire day, didn't quite go according to plan. But I still think that whatever was discussed, we're going to see and feel the ramifications of in the days, weeks and months to come.
But Mavuso, did the media put itself here in an untenable position, cornering themselves in a sense that I stand corrected, but you will help me here, Ziyanda. I believe the MKMVA are also going for tea.
On Thursday.
On Thursday in Nkandla. And now precedence has been set on how tea is covered at Nkandla. And there is that expectation that the same kind of treatment is going to be given. Should the journalists go and cover the tea in Nkandla between President Zuma and the MKMVA coming to show support?
Well, thank you very much for asking me those kinds of questions. I clearly cannot tell the media what to do. It would be totally wrong. But on the subject, on what happened that day, I think the EFF have been very unprofessional in their handling of the media. It's very easy with hindsight to say we shouldn't have gone there, but who knew that they were going to react so cynically to the presence of the media? If people don't want the media to be present in their events, they are billed as private and the media does not come. If they still insisted on coming, then of course they would be treated in the manner that they were. One doesn't get the impression that that was the intention. I think they did want to generate as much publicity as possible over this thing. I'm not good at speculating, but clearly I agree with Ziyanda that things didn't go as well as was expected. And so there was nothing to say other than to say they drank tea. I don't really blame the media. And I think the media must take a call. It's a different group of people, MKMVA, who want to see the president. If you think that's important for the public, you go. I'll ask them whether you will be allowed in or not. Yeah, I mean, really, yeah, that's how it is.
All right, Pippa, I'll bring you in here on that same question. I mean, have we set precedents here in terms of how these gatherings, whether we deem them populist, whether we deem them of national interest, how they should be covered? And therefore, we cannot now begin to say, oh, well, this particular grouping is not as important as the other one, and so we won't send as much of a contingent.
Well, I think both William and Bababusa made the point earlier that the EFF are masters at manipulation. They wanted the media there. You don't ask to come to tea on Twitter unless you want the media there. Whether the media is manipulated by the EFF or not, or should be more reflective, is another question. In fact, one of the comments made in the Satchwell report, to the report by retired Judge Kathy Satchwell, on the state of the media is actually how, what's the word, but how obsequious in some ways the media are to the EFF. For instance, they won't call a lot of, and I think it's changed recently, I must say that, but, you know, previously they would call Malema the CIC. Well, that's their term. It's not the term that the public, you know, he's the leader of the EFF. He's not the CIC. You know, there's only one commander-in-chief in the country, and that's the president of, you know, of armed forces. So I think that the media could possibly be self-reflective, but I take the point of what Ziyanda said, is that it would be a very brave or otherwise a very poor news editor who wouldn't send an OB van when everybody else was sending an OB van. My only point about it is that we suffer from the lack of knowledge and coverage of rural areas in any event. If you're going to go for this kind of spectacle, which means something, but we don't know yet what it means, but certainly you're being manipulated there, then at least use the opportunity while you're there to look a little bit deeper about the social cohesion, the conditions of people under the lockdown in that area. Yeah. Perhaps those stories will still come out. I'll be delighted if they do. But we have to take our own initiatives and not only be at the end of manipulation.
Yeah. Yeah. William, maybe final word from your side on that question of, I mean, that straightforward question, should journalists be ignoring populist events, or they are bound by code to cover them anyway?
Well, they need to make the decision, as the others have said, in their own newsroom, and dependent on what they think needs to be covered. The key thing is for them to be critical about what they are covering, and to what extent they're aware that is the narrative that they're trying to be driven towards. You know, so that, I think, is this fundamental point. They need to be able to make sure that the public see and that their audiences understand. This is why we chose to go and report on the story, because we think it could mean these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. And we opted to spend our precious resources on doing that because of who it is. You know, the fact is the former president has tea, I imagine, on a regular basis with lots of people. We know he sees guests as any former state's head of state does. You know, the media doesn't go and cover them on that, every single one of them, nor should they. When, however, you get a situation where you've got the EFF, who, as we've said, are so good at engineering these kinds of spectacles, you know, the media are then going to go and do that. Whether they'll choose to do that for the MKMVA, well, I'm not sure that many of them will think that has quite the same news value as Malema arriving in a helicopter.